The most notorious road in the world is the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows. According to tradition, it is the route Jesus took from Pilate's Hall to Calvary. The path is marked by stations frequently used by Christians for their devotions. One station marks the passing of Pilate's verdict, another the appearance of Simon to carry the cross. Two stations commemorate the stumble of Christ, another the word of Christ. There are 14 stations in all, each one a reminder of the events of Christ's final journey. Is the route accurate? Probably not. When Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, and again in AD 135, the streets of the city were destroyed. As a result, no one knows the exact route Christ followed that Friday. But we do know where the path actually began. The path began not in the court of Pilate, but in the halls of heaven. The Father began his journey when he left his home in search of us, armed with nothing more than a passion to win your heart. He came looking. His desire was singular, to bring his children home. The Bible has a word for this quest: reconciliation. God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, 2 Corinthians 5:19. The Greek word for reconcile means to render something otherwise. Reconciliation restitches the unraveled, reverses the rebellion, rekindles the cold passion. Reconciliation touches the shoulder of the wayward and woos him homeward. The path to the cross tells us exactly how far God will go to call us back. The scrawny boy with the tattoos had a cousin. The cousin worked the night shift at a convenience store south of Houston. For a few bucks a month, he would let the runaways stay in his apartment at night, but they had to be out during the day, which was fine with them. They had big plans. He was going to be a mechanic, and Madeline just knew that she could get a job as a department store. Of course, she knew nothing about cars, and she knew even less about getting a job. But you don't think of things like that when you're intoxicated on freedom. After a couple of weeks, the cousin changed his mind. The day he announced his decision, the boyfriend announced his. Madeline found herself facing the night with no place to sleep or hand to hold. It was the first of many such nights. A woman in the park told her about the homeless shelter near the bridge. For a couple of bucks, she could get a bowl of soup and a cot. A couple of bucks was about all she had. She used her backpack as a pillow and a jacket as a blanket. The room was so rowdy it was hard to sleep. Madeline turned her face to the wall and, for the first time in several days, thought of the whiskered face of her father as he would kiss her good night. But as her eyes began to water, she refused to cry. She pushed the memory deep inside and determined not to think about home. She'd gone too far to go back. The next morning, the girl in the cot beside her showed her a fistful of tips she'd made from dancing on tables. "This is the last night I'll have to stay here," she said. "Now I can pay for my own place. They told me they are looking for another girl. You should come by." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a matchbook. "Here's the address." Madeline's stomach turned at the thought. All she could do was mumble, "I'll think about it." She spent the rest of the week in the streets looking for work. At the end of the week, when it was time to pay her bill at the shelter, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the matchbook. It was all she had left. "I won't be staying tonight," she said, and walked out the door. Hunger has a way of softening convictions. Pride and shame. You'd never know they are sisters. They appear so different. Pride puffs out her chest. Shame hangs her head. Pride boasts. Shame hides. Pride seeks to be seen. Shame seeks to be avoided. But don't be fooled. The emotions have the same parentage. And the emotions have the same impact. They keep you from my Father. Pride says, "You're too good for him." Shame says, "You're too bad for him." Pride drives you away. Shame keeps you away. If pride is what goes before a fall, then shame is what keeps you from getting up after one. If Madeline knew anything, she knew how to dance. Her father had taught her. Now men the age of her father watched her. She didn't rationalize it, she just didn't think about it. Madeline simply did her work and took their dollars. She might never have thought about it except for the letters. The cousin brought them. Not one or two, but a box full, all addressed to her, all from her father. Your old boyfriend must have squealed on you. These come 2 or 3 a week, complained the cousin. Give him her address. Oh, but she couldn't do that. He might find her. Nor could she bear to open the envelopes. She knew what they said. He wanted her home. But if he knew what she was doing, he would not be writing. It seemed less painful not to read them, so she didn't. Not that week or the next when the cousin brought more, nor the week when he came again. She kept them in the dressing room at the club, organized according to postmark. She ran her fingers over the top of each, but couldn't bring herself to open one. Most days, Madeline was able to numb the emotions. Thoughts of home and thoughts of shame were shoved into the same part of her heart. But there were occasions when the thoughts were too strong to resist. Like the time she saw a dress in the clothing store window, a dress the same colors one her father had purchased for her, a dress that had been too plain for her. With much reluctance, she had put it on and stood with him before the mirror. Ma, you're as tall as I am, he had told her. She had stiffened at his touch. Seeing her weary face reflected in the store window, Madeline realized that she'd give it 1,000 dresses to feel his arm again. She walked away and resolved not to pass by that store again. In the time the leaves fell, and the air chilled, the mail came, the cousin complained, and the stack of letters grew. Still, she refused to send him an address, and she refused to read a letter. Then a few days before Christmas Eve, another letter arrived. Same shape, same color, but this one had no postmark, and it was not delivered by the cousin. It was sitting on her dressing room table. A couple of days ago, a big man stopped by and asked me to give you this, explained one of the other dancers. Said you'd understand the message. He was here? She asked anxiously. The woman shrugged. Suppose he had to be. Madeline swallowed hard and looked at the envelope. She opened it and removed the card. I know where you are, it read. I know what you do. This doesn't change the way I feel. What I've said in each letter is still true. But I don't know what you said, Madeline declared. She pulled a letter from the top of the stack and read it. Then a second and a third. Each letter had the same sentence. Each sentence asked the same question. In a matter of moments, the floor was littered with paper, and her face was streaked with tears. Within an hour, she was on a bus. I just might make it in time. She barely did. The relatives were starting to leave. Joe was helping Grandma in the kitchen when his brother called from a suddenly quiet den. Joe, someone is here to see you. Joe stepped out of the kitchen and stopped. In one hand, the girl held a backpack. In the other, she held a card. Joe saw the question in her eyes. The answer is yes, she said to her father. If the invitation is still good, the answer is yes. Joe swallowed hard. Oh my, the invitation is good. And so the two danced again on Christmas Eve. On the floor near the door rested a letter with Madeline's name and her father's request. Will you come home and dance with your papa again?